every once in a while you get a Hall of Fame tweet out of nowhere, right? I mean, it just comes out of nowhere. I was on Twitter the other day, and the Cardinals did their press conference introductory with Gannon, their new head coach, the former defensive coordinator of the Eagles, and he's like, the tweet was like a player's coach, which is just
Yes.
so bad if you're the Cardinals to like set it up like we got ourselves a guy who can relate to the players. And then all of the clips of him talking to the players were so awkward.
Yeah, it was a
He's
little
in
weird.
this, he's in like this like schmedium suit, like just like trying to hulk out of it. And every single person, he's like tapping up and like, hey man, yeah, I know you. And then he gets to I even know one of the Cardinals
Rondale
receivers,
Moore. It was Rondale
Rondell
Moore. Yeah,
Moore
yeah, yeah.
out of Purdue, right? And then
Yeah.
you just see him do the most ridiculous few, trying to like insinuate that he's going to get deep ball catches. And you
Yeah,
can look
just
on
doing an
Moore's
aerial
face.
attack sounds.
He's going few. And you can see the look on Moore's face like, oh my God, what are we doing?
He's like, yeah, yeah, this guy. Great. I'm really excited. Yeah, it was that was funny, man. That's gotten a lot of run on Twitter for sure. I did see that video, and yeah, him with Kyler Murray and yeah, a couple other players. I can't remember all of them, but yeah, just walking up to him, smacking him on the chest and stuff, trying to be like, yeah, yeah, patting him real hard. It's like, yeah, we're gonna go win games. How about that? Yeah, it
It's
it
wild.
is funny, but we gotta remember how weird and awkward Nick Sirianni was in his first
True,
introduction to the
true.
public. So obviously, maybe there's some sort of recipe for success in that. I don't know, but yeah, it was definitely a comical start to his tenure with the Arizona Cardinals, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there with just the complete disaster that's been over the last 5 years or so. But yeah, we shall see. Got a great show coming up today, Mark. We talk with Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot. So obviously I'm super excited because we get to hone in on some Steelers stuff and really get into the nitty gritty there. So looking forward to that. He's been doing it for a long time and always has some great stuff to add. So excited to have him on the show for the first time. And so that'll really be our show here to begin the off season of 2023 and kind of wrap things up with that interview and then look forward to talking, hopefully maybe we can get some Bears people on later this off season. Obviously we got a lot of draft prep coming up here as well. The one or two, I guess I should say, items of note before we get to the interview. Eric Bieniemy finally
Mm-hmm.
getting a job, not necessarily maybe the one that he was hoping for, not a head coaching job, but he goes to Washington as the offensive coordinator and assistant head coach. And too many people are talking about it being a lateral move. It is not a lateral move. For one, he gets a lot more autonomy with the play calling duties. But on top of that, assistant head coach isn't just kind of a scrub type of throwaway title. That's a legitimate title that gets you not only more money, but it's an actual promotion
Yeah.
for anyone in the NFL. So, it's not a lateral move. He gets a lot more power and ability in Washington. But obviously, that's the big news. The first Chiefs assistant to be on the move. What were your thoughts on that with Eric Bieniemy after so many interviews over the last several years, finally landing in a new spot?
My thoughts are I feel bad for Chiefs fans because Matt Nagy's back, offensive coordinator Matt Nagy. Overall, I think it was the right move for him. He had to make it in the
Yeah.
sense that when you have Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid around you, there's going to be questions about what do you actually do. He will have the chance to show everyone this is what I actually do with a historically frustrating offensive franchise, especially over the last 20 years. So if he can turn Washington into a team that scores points and makes Sam Howell look like something special or whoever they bring in a quarterback, Eric Bieniemy will be front line for a head coaching job very, very soon. Maybe even the Washington Commanders.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Commanders aren't tied at the hip to Ron Rivera in any, significant way. And if he does actually make Sam Howell look like a really solid quarterback or one that can at least just compete, that would get you high praise. I
Oh
mean, we
yeah,
didn't see a lot of Sam
absolutely.
Howell, obviously, but so maybe he is a lot better than we think. But there's a reason, he wasn't the starter for, the vast majority of the season. So yeah, if they can do something big with him, I think that would be, huge for Eric Bieniemy. Not just look what you did with Sam Howell, but look what you did with Sam Howell in your first year in the building. So in a team that obviously is reeling and needs a lot of help wherever it can get it. So yeah, I totally agree. And Washington, like you said, I mean, we've seen assistant head coaches be promoted to head coach permanently in their respective cities several times. So this could be another iteration of that development. Also, we saw some football that happened over the weekend. I will admit I didn't watch a whole lot of it. I saw some clips, a couple tidbits here and there, but the XFL debuting, I don't know, man. I think it's just going to take maybe like 2 or 3 seasons of this for me to even feel like I want to get on board, because it feels like more of the same, the AAF, the, USFL. Like it feels like the numerous attempts that we've had in recent years. Yeah. I know that this one seems to have a lot more backing, so it probably will have the staying power for at least a few years. But I don't know. I mean, were you interested at all in the weekend of XFL play?
I mean, not really. No, I caught a little bit of the Battlehawks game, St. Louis. They came back and won against the Bahamas of San Antonio. I'll just say
what
this.
What is what is
I
that?
have no idea. Zero idea.
Hines Ward's the head coach, though. I know that.
He is Hines Ward. I'll just say this overall. I like that the XFL is now and the USFL is not until April. So the USFL will be starting when the XFL is ending. And so I think the XFL is in a bad spot because I think there is football fatigue. And we were excited to watch golf. I was excited to watch the Daytona 500, this weekend. I think ending,
but yeah,
my satiation for football will be there, especially when the USFL gets going post-draft and all this other stuff. And, when all it is the dog days of summer baseball. So I think they're in a unique spot as well. So we'll see. If it's on at a bar, I might watch it if I'm out, but I'm not going to schedule my viewing around it. AJ McCarron did not look good for the Battlehawks in the little bit I saw. So yeah, not great.
Yeah, I was surprised to see AJ McCarron still slinging it. Apparently, Martavis Bryant too is in the league. I mean, these guys got to be over 30 for sure.
Yeah,
so like well approaching their mid 30s at the very least. But it's cool. It's cool that guys have an opportunity to make money playing football. I think it's cool. We see a lot of basketball players go overseas and make a decent living. Playing overseas, you're not going to make as much money in the XFL or the USFL, but gives them an opportunity to at least do it and make some money and have a full-time job doing what they love. So I think that aspect is cool. And it's the NFL is a copycat league, but football, it's a copycat sport in general. The NFL might pull a random rule here and there that they think works out, so it's a good testing ground for some of that stuff too. I know we saw, instead of onside kicks, they had 4th and 15. I don't know if the NFL would ever go that route, because if you put Mahomes in a 4th and 15, I'm gonna take him to win that game pretty much anytime. But yeah, I mean, there are some cool things like that you can look forward to, and maybe some sort of extra rule or adjustment will come out of it for the NFL. But wasting no more time, let's get to our interview with Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot. Great stuff to say about this 2022 season with Kenny Pickett, some Mike Tomlin talk, and some free agency wish list. So really excited to talk to Alex Kozora right now. All right. Well, without further ado, excited to welcome in Alex Kozora to the Football Lounge here with Mark and Dan. Alex, longtime writer and contributor at SteelersDepot.com, and you can find him on Twitter at Alex Kozora. Also does the Terrible Podcast with Dave Bryan. You can find that anywhere that you get your podcast. So, Alex, welcome to the show. Really happy to have you here to talk some Steelers.
Hey, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So we are starting the offseason now. Obviously, it's always a long season, but it flies by at the same time. So this is one of our favorite times of the year on the show to kind of dive into the offseason, really get into some, nitty gritty details on a lot of teams. And so obviously, me being a Steelers fan, Mark is diehard Bears, so we try and satiate those tastes to begin the offseason. And so I'm really excited to talk some Steelers here with you to kick things off for the offseason. So I guess first off, I'll kind of just throw a general question your way, Alex. It was a kind of a tumultuous year for Pittsburgh. Rough start with the 2-6, but then finishing really strong 7-2 after the bye. As Mike Tomlin, obviously, it's been well documented, keeps that streak of non-losing seasons alive and kept them in contention for the playoffs up to the final week. As you kind of look at the good and the bad, the multiple quarterbacks, everything that went on with the Steelers this year, what would your takeaway be from the 2022 season?
Yeah, I would say it was a year of transition. I kind of liken it a bit to what the Patriots went through that first year post Tom Brady when they had Cam Newton and kind of went through a pretty bumpy ride. Now Pittsburgh tried to, I think, accelerate that process by drafting the rookie quarterback immediately after their franchise future Hall of Fame quarterback retired. And so obviously you got those bumps along the way. It was the youngest offense in football overall by far. And so you felt those growing pains of a second-year OC, new quarterback, new chapter, change in quarterback, offensive line, new guys there trying to gel, third offensive line coach in 3 years, a lot of rookies playing pretty meaningful snaps. And so that's how you get to be 2-6 by the bye when you have all those new pieces. You lose TJ Watt, 1 week into the season, your defense is severely impacted. But I think he certainly found an identity. They did the second half of the year. They found some traction, and they're going to have a lot of continuity for this offseason where the entire offense basically is going to be returning. Defensively, you're going to have all your stars and studs in place. Probably be some more turnover on that side of the ball the offseason than the offense. But generally speaking, it's kind of a run it back year in 2023 for the Steelers. And so hopefully a year from now, we can talk about how 2022 was that transition year, that bumpy ride that gets you to be in a more better and stable place for 2023.
Yeah, it's been. Oh, sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to stay on 2022 really quick before we transition. I don't know, Dan, what else you had on 2022, but looking back on it, one of the big things, obviously, you mentioned TJ Watt. From the outsider perspective, do Steelers fans, and do you as someone who covers the team, do you get really concerned when you see those numbers of like anytime TJ misses a game, what are they like it's an insane number. It's like 1 in 11 or something whenever TJ misses it. Is that, do you look at it like, hey, coaching, we need to be better? Or is it just like, we need to be able to replace TJ Watt's production somehow? Because we know if he's anything like his brother, their guys are going to miss a couple games a year just because the physicality that they play. You know what I mean?
Absolutely, Mark. Yeah, I think it's a reminder to scientists to clone TJ Watt because that's what apparently everybody needs. It's such a crazy stat, and I forget the exact numbers, but I mean, I think Pittsburgh's has a better record when Ben was hurt as opposed to when TJ Watt was hurt, which is just a crazy thing for any non-quarterback to have that kind of impact. And so he is the lifeblood of that defense. The outside linebackers, the pass rush are the engines. Now, I think Pittsburgh's coaching staff did their very best with so many schematic adjustments and personnel changes and moving guys like DeMarvin Leal. Pittsburgh had 22 different defensive personnel groupings or alignments this year. That's double what it was 2 years ago. And so that group worked really hard to add the 3-3-5 and, 3 inside linebacker packages and do all these kinds of things to try to compensate. End of the day, losing TJ Watt's losing TJ Watt, and it's hard to do anything in season to try to replace that. It's acknowledgement there must be better depth. The depth behind Watt and Highsmith has been really thin since trading Melvin Ingram. No one's going to replace Watt 1-to-1, but Malik Reed's not going to cut it and did not cut it. So if anything, it's a reminder you better have that third outside linebacker the way you need a third receiver, a third corner, because your depth will be tested.
Yeah, that's kind of even, going back to, with the Bud Dupree pairing as well. They just depth behind those two. It's slim to none. And and then you lose one guy and that really, takes a big chunk out of your production. We're going to get to Kenny Pickett in a moment because obviously he's the big, talking point for not just Steelers fans, but really across the country of the NFL fans as well. But I did have a quick question for you because another mind-blowing stat was the fact that I think outside of like 24 snaps, they had the same starting 5 offensive linemen the entire season, which is something that even, for any team, but really Pittsburgh has had its share of offensive line injuries in the last decade. And so to have that continuity was kind of amazing. And then I'm sitting here going, man, this sucks that we couldn't have had this, in like 2016 or 17. But then at the same time, Alex, it's never a bad thing, obviously, but was it also probably even more crucial to a year of transition to having that same 5, and with so many new players on the offensive line, like James Daniels, like Mason Cole, to have that continuity and to maybe set that foundation for, the next, hopefully half decade plus?
Absolutely, Dan. And I think it was so important because it was that year of transition. And again, you had your third offensive line coach in 3 years, and there was a big adjustment period because the way that Pat Meyer, the O-line coach, teaches things is pretty different than past coaches in Pittsburgh. It's a very aggressive based system, especially in pass protection. You're always going to be the aggressor and never going to be passive and take steps backward. And so a lot of those guys struggled. James Daniels, who I was really happy this team signed in the offseason, looked miserable in training camp trying to make that adjustment. And so it was important for those guys to stay healthy and play together and learn the system and grow together. People ask me, how did this offensive line get better? What was the secret? It was health. It was continuity. It was the same 5, as you said, every single week for literally all 17 games. The only team in football that could say that in 2022. And so that was good for their growth and development overall. And it was just good because the depth for Pittsburgh last year was miserable. They had nothing behind the starting 5 and still have nothing behind the starting 5. So if you had lost anybody, it would have been on, Jesse Davis or Trent Scott, and it would have been a real problem. So Pittsburgh got lucky because their depth was poor. And even if Pittsburgh wants to retain the same starting 5 for next year, there's a case to be made for that. The depth has to be better because it does not look good right now.
Yeah, I think, Mark, you'd probably be cool with having James Daniels still there in
He
Chicago.
rubs that in
for
my
Justin.
face all season long. Like all season long.
I was
that's
so
been
excited.
In my face. And it's true. I mean, he's a great player. I will say, part of it too, you mentioned 3 offensive line coaches in 3 years, and you're talking about continuity. Is that one of the reasons why Matt Canada is still, is still a part of this team?
I think it's one of the 2 big reasons. I think they didn't want to, as I said, the offense personnel is going to be intact next year. There are no major free agents leaving. The 2 biggest names are Zach Gentry, the number 2 tight end, and fullback Derek Watt. Both those guys could easily be retained if the team wants to. So I think the sake of continuity was one thing. And then you saw the progression in the offense. Not that it was good, but it was better the second half of the year. They played more ball control. They were the number 1 offense on third down the back half of the year. They finished a couple more drives. They scored a bit more. They cut down on turnovers. I would say the offense the second half of the year, they didn't win games, but they didn't lose games either. And they were losing games the first half of the year with their penalties and their turnovers and just really sloppy play overall. So I would say those 2 reasons. And plus Pittsburgh, they just don't fire coordinators. They part ways after their contract expires. Canada's contract does not expire until after next season, 2023. And so you got to go back to like 2002 or 2003 last time Pittsburgh Steelers fired a coordinator. And so they like to keep their guys and not pay guys to be fired.
I understand the argument that a lot of people make with, trying to have the continuity for a quarterback and his offensive coordinator. We saw the Sam Darnold, experiment and how much turnover he had to go through. And there's a laundry list of quarterbacks that have had to deal with it. But it also doesn't make sense to me to like kick the can down the curb as well. If Matt Canada gets fired after this season, then you're starting all over with Kenny Pickett going into year 3 versus year 2. But speaking from what you saw from him just in terms of his growth over the year, which obviously helped lead to getting 7 victories in those final 9 games and, a couple back-to-back game-winning drives by him. We don't like to make declarative statements, and I know you don't as well. Like, you guys aren't really into the hyperbole and making, grand statements about the future of players. But from what you saw from his growth and maybe forecasting into what you hope to see from his growth in year 2, did you see enough out of Kenny Pickett to feel at least somewhat confident that he could be the guy for the foreseeable future at the, most crucial position for Pittsburgh?
I did, and I agree with you, Dan. I think keeping Canada for the sake of continuity alone is a mistake, because I made the joke after they announced they were going to keep him was, well, can't wait for the offense to be average next year, Canada to get fired, and we're having this conversation a year from now. I mean, it just seems a little silly to me. But putting that aside, yeah, I think you saw that growth from Pickett. Now, what is the ceiling? Can he compete in a very difficult AFC and AFC North that has full of first round top tier quarterbacks in the North with Burrow, and we'll see what Deshaun Watson can be next year, but we'll see what Lamar Jackson can be. But those guys likely to be around the AFC at large with Mahomes and Allen and Lawrence and Herbert, et cetera, et cetera. If Aaron Rodgers joins the AFC, another name potentially there. But for Pickett himself, you saw that growth. And I thought just some of the intangibles, the leadership, this team needed leaders on offense. Post Ben, didn't really have a guy to look to. Once Pickett became the starter, really kind of was that guy that commanded respect, attention, and ran this offense well, showed his accuracy, showed obviously the 2 game-winning drives were big grow-up moments for him against the Raiders, against the Ravens. And so in Pittsburgh, you're defined by what you do against the Ravens. In Baltimore, you're defined by what you do versus Pittsburgh. And you saw Pickett really come up big in those moments. So where is that ceiling for Pickett? Can he really be one of those guys that goes toe for toe with the top quarterbacks in football? We'll see. It's still too early to declare that, but I think you were comfortable with where he ended the year, and really excited to see him make that sophomore leap where so many players make that jump from year 1 to year 2. Now that he knows he's the guy. Last year was just trying to compete and be the backup, maybe start. This year he is the guy. The offense is going to pour into him in that regard, and that'll be good for him and good for this offense.
I think that's a huge point you just made there too. The full offseason of Pickett getting the support, full offseason into it, doesn't have to worry about Mitchell Trubisky or anyone else they're bringing into camp. I do think you're absolutely right on there as well, that he deserves year 2 and to see the growth and to see what happens in year 2. Every quarterback now, in my opinion, deserves that full year and a half, 2 years of starting to give a full declarative. Everyone wants to jump on, Justin Herbert, look what he did in his first start against the Chiefs with 5 minutes warning. Well, I do think that can provide some clarity. I also think on the opposite, look at Zach Wilson. After a year and a half, you can also have a lot of clarity. Like, it's just not going to get better. Mm-hmm. So pushing on that fact with Pickett, would be my biggest concern if I was a Steelers fan, though. If you are a person who appears, just from the general what we can see now, is not going to be an uber talent, a Herbert, a Patrick Mahomes, where their talent can just carry teams to deep playoff runs. It seems as though what you need then is like what Kirk Cousins is getting in Minnesota. You need Justin Jefferson. You need a great offensive line. You need an all-star running back. So is that in your mindset as a Steelers fan going, all right, we already know that we have to start putting big-time weapons and big-time players around this guy, because at his ceiling, if he's a little above Dak, a little above Kirk, you say to yourself, guys like that need those players to carry themselves over, and also a healthy TJ Watt.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and you're right. The risk with Pickett is that you're in that quarterback purgatory, that Kirk Cousins of he's good, he's like Derek Carr, he's solid, he'll get you to the playoffs. Will he win you a Super Bowl? It would have to go all right. And it's not even like where Pittsburgh used to be. It was the Steelers, it was Ben, Tom Brady, and Peyton Manning. If you could catch it on the right year and kind of avoid those guys, you could get through. And that's what happened to Pittsburgh when they beat Manning in 2005. But generally speaking, they could avoid those guys. This time around, every AFC team is loaded. There's so many good quarterbacks. It's hard to avoid those names. To the point about putting weapons around Pickett, I think regardless of whether or not Pickett becomes an elite quarterback or not, you want to add weapons. It's like getting a Lambo and saying we have too much horsepower. There's no such thing. You want to have as many weapons as possible, because Pickett is that elite guy. More about weapons will help you compete. Josh Allen, probably not enough weapons in Buffalo right now. They want to add, even though Allen's an elite level guy. If Pickett is a Kirk Cousins, then yes, you're going to want to add the best supporting cast possible. So Pickett is your starter. You already have the investment in him. You build around him regardless of what he ends up being, because whatever he is, a better supporting cast will amplify and bring the best out of Pickett. And so really, I don't think the equation changes regardless of what Pickett's future is or is not.
Talking with Alex Kozora of Steelers Depot. And Alex, but right before we get into, maybe a little bit of your offseason wish list and trying to figure out maybe what the Steelers will do in the draft and in free agency, I have one more question for you before we get to that, and that is around the national conversation of offensive head coaches versus defensive head coaches. There's been a lot of talk in the last maybe like 5 or 6 years of the formula to winning is an offensive head coach or a defensive head coach with an elite offensive staff. And so far, I mean, in recent years, we've kind of seen that come to fruition, although there are certainly an anomaly here and there. Do you worry at all in Tomlin being a defensive head coach without having any sort of elite offensive staff that really they've been devoid of, you could probably argue, since Todd Haley at the very earliest, going back to then when at least, they had a very competent offense run by a really talented offensive coordinator. Does that worry you at all that Tomlin is a heavily defensive-minded head coach without them really spending on that offensive side of the ball?
I would say Tomlin being a defensive-minded head coach in itself doesn't worry me. I mean, this guy has been to 2 Super Bowls. He's won a Super Bowl, and so that obviously is not preventing this team from getting there. And I think he's, a great leader. And I think sometimes we can get hyper focused on how good are you on your side of the football, and not about the overall job of head coach to lead, to manage, to delegate, to make the hard decisions. But I think it's fair to say, yeah, if you don't have that great offensive coaching staff, regardless of the background of your head coach, it might be hard to win because, again, you're in an AFC that has so much talent and coaching staff and quarterbacks, and you need guys that can combat that. I mean, the way that, Andy Reid was able to beat the Eagles because it was a great offense versus a great defense was schematically, the way that they created, wide open touchdowns off those motions to beat the Eagles man coverage, and the way they aggressively attack some of those jet motions. And so that's all scheme and scouting and game planning. I mean, I could have made those touchdowns. They were so wide open. So that's not Patrick Mahomes. That's just, great scheme marrying with great talent. So my thought is, if you have just good players and good coaching, you'll have a good team. The great teams are the ones that have both. That's how you get a team like the Chiefs, great coaching and great talent. And so Pittsburgh will probably need part of that. And that's my concern about keeping Matt Canada. I don't think he's the guy that's going to outduel the Chiefs in the future or anything like that. And so, yeah, that's a valid concern, but it's not about Tomlin being a defensive guy, just more about not having the offensive pieces.
Yeah, so going off of that, do you think that Tomlin gets another quarterback? And what I mean is that do you feel like Tomlin and Pickett are now, their time in Pittsburgh together is now tied together? Or do you think there's a scenario where Tomlin outlives Pickett, where the organization looks and goes, we just drafted the wrong guy. We still believe in Mike. We're going with it. Or do you feel like, as we've heard the rumblings the last couple of years, if Mike has a season below 500 or things aren't going as smoothly and he didn't make it work with Kenny, the team would move on?
Those are all long-term views that I wish I had good answers for, but my strong feeling is that Mike Tomlin will be here as long as Mike Tomlin wants to be the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So even if Kenny Pickett doesn't work out in 2-3 years from now, this team moves on, I still expect Mike Tomlin to be the head coach until he says, I want to retire, the way that Chuck Noll retired, the way that Bill Cowher retired. It's just the way the Steelers do things, right or wrong, or they stand by Mike Tomlin. The overall stability, success, and culture that's been created. I understand there are certainly criticisms of Mike Tomlin. It is super frustrating. This team has not won a playoff game since 2016. That is not acceptable. But I think regardless of Pickett, it's going to be Tomlin for a long time.
I remember, Alex, several years ago when Kevin Colbert and the Steelers signed Ladarius Green to a 5-year, $25 million deal, and it was like, whoa, the Steelers are spending big for the first time in forever during free agency. Obviously that one didn't pan out too well. We have a new staff in town with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. Obviously Khan not new to the Steelers, but in a new role. How active do you envision them being, this year in particular? The free agency class isn't terribly awe-inspiring in several positions, but just in terms of their overall philosophy and what about how these guys operate in some of their, the limited sample sizes we have, how active do you see this team being?
It'll partially depend on how much cap space they create. We know that William Jackson is going to be cut here before March 15th. We'll see what other moves they make or don't make, what happens to Mitch Trubisky, Miles Jack, Keller Witherspoon. And so that'll kind of give us a lay of the land about how much space they're working with. If they create more space, it may be with the intention and vision of being more active in free agency. I think it'll be maybe a bit quieter than last year, which was pretty aggressive for the Pittsburgh Steelers standards. So it's always hard to say for sure. It depends on who becomes available and contract demands. And, they could go talk to a guy and try to sign a guy. It doesn't work out. You don't hear about it. So, it's hard to say for sure. As you said, Dan, there's kind of a newness with Omar Khan and Andy Weidel. So it's not the same old Colbert Tomlin that were kind of pretty easy to scout and predict. But I think with Khan and Weidel, this is their first full offseason running the show. They didn't get hired in their roles until late May, after free agency, the bulk of it, and after the draft last year. That's when Kevin Colbert step down. So this is kind of the first time that Khan and Weidel can build a roster in their vision. And you may see some turnover there. It just may not be some of the higher paid guys because they're still going to be pretty expensive to try to bring in.
There's a couple of those linebackers there that you mentioned with Devin Bush and, Miles Jack and company. What is their fascination with Robert Spillane? Why in your mind do you think he got so much playing time this year, especially back half of the season?
It is funny because every year Robert Spillane starts on the bench, and every year Robert Spillane's starting, because he works his way, wiggles his way into the lineup. I think they trust him. He's a smart guy. He's assignment sound. He's an all situations player. They play him on third downs and dime packages, not because he runs a 4-4, because Robert Spillane does not run a 4-4, but because they trust him to do the job. And Devin Bush was maybe a hard guy to trust at times, and Spillane was just the guy that was always dependable, available, doesn't get hurt, just consistently out there. And so certainly worth upgrading. And there's a big conversation about inside linebacker, what this team could do with Miles Jack, Mark Robinson, promising second-year player. But yeah, I think there's just a lot of trust and confidence in Robert Spillane to be assignment sound.
Is there one big name out there that you're like, you know what, just the fan in me wants to see that person in a Steelers uniform next year?
I don't know if there's that one name. I mean, if I could wave a magic wand to make Tremaine Edmonds a Pittsburgh Steeler, I probably would. I know that's become a pretty popular name, but financially, it's gonna cost a lot. I'm still kind of working through some of my early free agency wish list and going through some names. And again, it depends on who gets re-signed, who gets tagged. I mean, if Deron Payne would become available, but that probably won't happen. I just think overall, it's going to be more trench focused. Andy Weidel, trench guy. That's kind of how they built that thing in Philadelphia. So you may see some attention there to the trenches, the potentially inside linebacker, but I'm probably still a bit early on trying to comb through a list of specific names.
I'd love to see Javon Hargrave back, but he is going to garner way too high of a price this offseason for sure. Hated to lose him years ago to the Eagles, but great player there. So yeah, that kind of brings us to the draft. Obviously, they got two, basically first round picks, first pick of the second round from Chicago. There are, quite a few holes that we've mentioned on this team, the cornerback room being one of those. Is there a particular position that you think needs to be addressed by the 32nd pick at the very latest in your mind?
Yeah, right now, top of my list is defensive line. You have Cam Hayward, and beyond that, I don't know what else is going to be there next year. Chris Wormley, pending free agent, torn ACL, doubtful he'll be ready for week 1. Larry Ogunjobi, pending free agent, not sure if he's going to come back or not. Reasons for or against. And then behind that, Isaiah Lattimore did not make a jump last year. Marvin Leal, to me, is not an every down defensive lineman like Cam Hayward, like Chris Wormley. I think he's best kind of in the role that he had in 2022, playing as a hybrid edge, interior sub rusher on third down. That's probably best for him. And so your depth looks really pretty poor there. Even your starters look pretty poor. Nose tackle, Tyson Alualu, he's going to retire. Montravius Adams, a bit better the second half of the season, but is he a consistent every down or every down for a nose tackle guy? Probably not. So I think defensive line is where my primary focus would be in terms of things that have to get upgraded sooner than later.
You recently came back from the Senior Bowl. That's such a cool event, that Jim Nagy and company put on every year, where we really get to, see some of those guys that could become draft risers come April. Tell me a little bit about your experience out there. I know you got to go to the practices during the week. What was your overall experience like? And just kind of set the stage for what type of environment it is there, and just the ability to get to talk to some of these guys. I'm sure you get some great stories and just really get some feel good moments out of there going there.
Yeah, the events changed a bit over the years. It was better this year than last year because it was more open, more accessible. We could talk to players after practice, go on the field, and have some conversations we couldn't have last year, kind of coming out of the COVID stuff. It's probably become a little less personal than when I first started going there about a decade ago, where there's more separation between teams and media. It's not as intermingled. But it's still a really cool event. And as you said, Dan, it's about talking to the players and learning their stories. And it's good for me because I'm so wrapped up in Pittsburgh Steelers stuff during the season. I'm kind of trying to play catch up to draft stuff. And so the Senior Bowl really allows me some time to dedicate to watching and hearing from those guys. And I love the small schoolers. I love the guys that are coming from the FCS level that are competing against the big boys. And Javon Hargrave was one of those guys, years back that tore it up at the Senior Bowl and kind of put himself on the map. So Aubrey Miller from Jackson State had a really good week down there. Physical guy that really loves the game, and you kind of really just feel how much it meant to him to be there. Isaiah Land from Florida A&M, the defensive end, really skinny high schooler, 170-pound high schooler, he told me, and then he kind of grew up and didn't have any other offers but A&M, and went there, became Defensive Player of the Year, and had a really good week at the Senior Bowl. So it's just a really cool event to learn about these guys and hear their stories.
As far as taking it from the Steelers' perspective, you've been covering the team for so long. Are this, as a Bears fan, that Claypool pick has been, beat to death like a horse. Do you see the Steelers being aggressive? I mean, with having that and having a little bit more malleableness with their picks, are the Steelers a team that are going to shock people on draft and all of a sudden they're moving up 5, 6, 7, 8 picks to go attack and go get a guy? Or do you think from, you're covering the team that, no, they're going to hang back. They're more like the Packers, going to wait. Things will fall to them and they'll make do with what they got in front of them at the time.
I'm going to give you, I'm sorry, Mark, I'm going to give you kind of a politician's answer. Maybe. I guess this all this time. Will this team go up and down? I don't know. I don't think the team knows right now because it's hard to know those things until it's draft day and what's on the board, what the offers are, what you did in free agency, the depth of a position in the class. It's so hard to say. Now, traditionally, Pittsburgh has generally hung back, as you said, like Green Bay, and they, stood pat and they didn't make a lot of moves. Occasionally they would go up, not that often though. I think one thing you can say, just broadly over the next couple of years with Kahn and Weidl is this team's probably going to trade down more than they have in years past. Now, is that this year? Who the heck knows? We'll see. But with Kevin Colbert in his entire Steelers tenure as GM, he traded down at any point in the draft 3 times. His whole tenure. Last time he traded down was 2010. So this guy just did not go down in the draft at all. I imagine that Kahn and Weidl are going to be more open to that. But will it happen this year? It's possible. They have some draft capital to work with. They also don't have a 5th or 6th round pick. So they got a 4th and 2 7s. So it's kind of a gap there where if you want to trade down, pick up a day 3 pick, there's an opportunity there. So it just really depends on what happens on draft day, what offers get presented, and kind of what the lay of the land looks like.
A lot of newness for Pittsburgh this year, and a lot of newness with the team as well going into the 2023 season. So lots to look forward to there. Alex, thank you so much for being here with us. It's been a pleasure. You can find Alex at Alex Kozora, Kozora, on Twitter, as well as find all of his work at SteelersDepot.com. Alex, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, that was great stuff. I always love, reading Alex's content. They really go in depth. And, as you heard there, he's not into hyperbole. He's not into over, making things overly dramatic.
No hot
takes.
takes.
Tell you how it is and staying realistic with it. And that's what we appreciate about conversations like this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, he was great. And we hope to keep bringing more of this stuff as the offseason progresses, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. That's going to be a point of emphasis for us here on the Football Lounge, moving forward, especially throughout this offseason. So really excited to get after it. We've got the draft coming up in April, so there will be plenty more episodes where we kind of dive into a lot of these draft prospects and, playing with a little bit of some mock drafting as well. So excited for that. Hope you all enjoyed the interview, and be sure, as always, to tell us what you think on Twitter, on Facebook. Comment in the YouTube section, give us a like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Really appreciate the support, and we'll see you back here next week.